presenting the 2012 International Court of Justice case, Germany against Italy, which addresses the issue of state immunity in relation to international crimes committed during World War II. I'm Yasmin MAISARAH binti Rosnan with matrix number 079143 will explain the facts of this case. In 1940, Italy joined Germany in World War II but later surrendered in 1943, after which German forces occupied Italian territory, committing war crimes including massacres and forced labor. After the war, Germany compensated many victims, but Italian military internees were excluded. These internees filed lawsuits in Italian courts to seek compensation from Germany, but Germany objected, citing state immunity. The legal issues here is the Italian courts ruled that Germany's immunity did not apply in cases involving international crimes and allowed the lawsuits to proceed. Greek courts did the same and ordered Germany to pay damages. However, Germany refused to recognize this judgment, arguing that it violated its immunity and it sought enforcement through Italian courts, which seized a German property, Villa Vigani in Italy. Germany then filed a case with the ICJ, claiming that Italy violated its immunity by allowing these lawsuits and enforcing the foreign judgments. Therefore, in the ICJ decision, the ICJ ruled in favor of Germany, stating that Italy violated Germany's state immunity by permitting foreign lawsuits and taking enforcement actions against German property. The court emphasized that the state immunity is a core principle of international law. While exceptions exist, they didn't apply here. For the conclusion, this case reinforces the importance of state immunity, but also highlights the tension between sovereignty and the need for accountability in cases of gross violations of international law. Now, I will pass the presentation to the next presenter.
Okay, so for the territorial tort principle, the International Court of Justice, which is the ICJ, notes that the main thrust of the first Italian argument is that even in cases where the acts in question were carried out through inquiry, the state is no longer entitled to immunity concerning acts which lead to death, personal injury, or property damage on the territory of the foreign state due to the violation of customary international law. This is known as state immunity's tort exception. ICJ comes to the conclusion that customary international law still require a state be granted immunity in proceeding for torts allegedly committed on the territory of another state by its armed force and other organs during the course of conducting an armed conflict, after carefully examining the pertinent national and international practices. As a result, the court determines that the territorial tort principle cannot be used to support the Italian court's decision to grant Germany immunity. Meanwhile, in jurisdiction norms, jurisdiction have been stated in Article 53 of the Vienna Convention Law of Treaties, where jurisdiction is a norm of general international law accepted and recognized by the international community of states as a whole, from which no derogation is permitted, and it renders a treaty in conflict void. The court rejected Italy's argument on the second strand, which hold that Germany's violation of jurisdiction rule from 1943 to 1945 overrides sovereign for immunity. The court notes that this line of reasoning is predicated on the idea that there is a contradiction between Germany's immunity and the jurisdiction norms, which are a component of the law of armed conflict. It finds no conflict between state immunity rules and jurisdiction principle, which prohibit crimes like murder and forced labor because they address different issues. State immunity rule does not address the legality of behavior, rather that they are restricted to deciding whether or not a state court have jurisdiction over another state. The court also states that national courts have dismissed the claim that jurisdiction superseded the doctrine of state immunity and that no national law has limited immunity in situations where jurisdiction violations are alleged. The court comes to the conclusion that the application of customary international law on state immunity was unaffected, even if it were assumed that the proceedings before the Italian courts contain violation of jurisdiction standards. That's all from me. I pass to the next presenter.
Thank you, Suraya. Now, I will explain about the failure of alternative mechanism in municipal court and its relation to state immunity. So, the failure of alternative mechanism to secure adequate compensation for victims of grave human rights violation often raise question about the fairness and applicability of state immunity. In the Germany against Italy case, Italian courts permitted civil claim against Germany based on the argument that victims of Nazi atrocities have been denied meaningful reparation. So, while the ICJ acknowledged the inadequacy of compensation provided by Germany, it firmly held that state immunity is a procedural rule that cannot be disregarded even when other avenues for redress are unavailable. So, Immunity operates independently of the substantive legality or morality of the act in question. However, the strict adherence to procedural immunity highlights a significant accountability gap, whereby victims of egregious violations are often left without effective remedies when states fail to uphold their obligation under international humanitarian law. So, the ICJ's ruling underscores the limitation of the current legal framework, which prioritizes sovereignty and procedural protection over the need for justice and reparation. And this situation points to the urgent need for alternative mechanisms such as international claims, commissions, or negotiated agreement to address the demands of victims without undermining the principle of state immunity. After all, state immunity in civil claims against foreign states remains a cornerstone of international law, whereby it protects the sovereign equality and preventing the politicization of national courts. However, its application in cases involving grave violation of international law raises significant moral and legal questions. So, from what have Suraya presented before about the territorial tort principle, we can conclude that it is not applicable to ex jure imperi, especially those committed during armed conflict. In the case of jus cogens norms, while morally persuasive, this norm do not yet override procedural rules of immunity under current international law. And the failure of compensation mechanism, the absence of reparation does not invalidate immunity, but underscores the need for alternative disputes resolution mechanism. Thank you. I will pass to the next presenter.
So what is jurisdiction immunity? So basically, jurisdiction immunity is a key principle in international law that prevent one state from being sued in the court of another without its consent. This is based on the idea that all states are equal and must respect each other's sovereignty. The principle distinguishes between act done by a state, a sovereign authority, also known as acta jure imperi, and also private act, which is acta jure gestionis. Action by a state armed force during war are considered a sovereign act and are therefore protected by jurisdiction immunity. The International Court of Justice, which is ICJ, confirmed this in the Germany against Italy case, even when the act involved serious violation of international law like war crime. So some argue that jus cogens norms, which is fundamental rules of international law like prohibited of genocide or torture, should override immunity. However, the ICJ ruled that jus cogens norms do not affect immunity. Immunity is a procedural rule about where a case can be heard while jus cogens relate to illegality of the act itself. Thus, a state retains immunity even if its action violate jus cogens norms.
Assalamualaikum and hi madam, my name is NURHANAN QISTINA binti MUHYIDDIN and my metric number is 079105 and I will continue on this discussion. The ICJ also rejected the territorial tort exception, which allows states to be sued for torts committed on another state's territory. It ruled that this exception doesn't apply to military actions during armed conflict, as applying it will disrupt international law's balance. In the Germany against Italy case, the ICJ ruled that Germany was entitled to immunity for actions committed by its armed forces in World War II, even though those acts were severe violations of international humanitarian law. This decision highlights the distinction between the illegality of the acts and the procedural rule of immunity. In conclusion, jurisdictional immunity is available. States are generally immune from lawsuits for acts committed by their armed forces during armed conflicts, even in cases involving serious crimes. While this may seem unjust for victims, the ICJ emphasized immunity is crucial to maintaining state sovereignty and balance in the international law. And that is all from me. I will pass to the next presenter.
So yes, Italy had violated Germany's jurisdictional immunity by allowing civil claim in its court against Germany for action committed by the German raid during World War II. So the court found first by 12 votes to 3 that Italy violated Germany's immunity under international law by allowing civil claims related to World War II crimes committed by the German raid. And second, the court finds by 14 votes to 1 that Italy violated Germany's immunity by taking enforcement action against Villa Vigni. Third, the court finds by 14 votes to 1 that Italy violated Germany's immunity by enforcing Greek court decision related to World War II crimes committed by the German raid in Greece. And fourth, the court finds by 14 votes to 1 that Italy must take measures such as passing legislation to ensure that court decision violating Germany's immunity no longer have effect. So lastly, the court unanimously reject all other claims made by Germany. Then I will pass to the next presenter to explain further.
So we are agree with this question, and there are three reasons. The first one is the civil claims in Italian courts, where Italy allowed its court to hear claims brought by Italian citizens who had suffered during World War II due to atrocities committed by German forces such as killings and forced labor. Italy also argued that these grave violations of international law justified an exception to jurisdictional immunity. However, ICJ disagreed because it held that under customary international law, jurisdictional immunity applies even in cases involving serious violation of international humanitarian law. The court emphasized that immunity is a procedural law, that it determines whether a state can be sued, not whether its action were lawful. By allowing these claims, Italy breached Germany's immunity. The second one is the measures of constraint on German property, where another violation occurred when Italian courts imposed legal constraint on German state property, specifically Villa Vigani. Villa Vigani is a property used for governmental, non-commercial purposes. So ICJ ruled that international law prohibits enforcement actions against state property without the consent of the foreign state unless the property is used for commercial purpose. Since Villa Vigani served governmental purpose, Italy's actions violated Germany's immunity from enforcement. And lastly is the enforcement of Greek judgment, where Italian courts enforce judgment issued by Greek courts against Germany. These include cases related to the Tomo massacre, where German forces committed atrocities in Greece during the war. The ICJ found that these two violated Germany's immunity. So, Italian courts should have independently determined whether Germany was entitled to immunity instead of automatically enforcing the foreign judgment. By failing to do so, Italy breached the international law. So, I will pass the next presentation to the next person.
The next question to be discussed is, do you agree with the decision of the courts in this case, and why or why not? So in this slide, I will discuss on why I disagree with the ICJ's decision in the jurisdictional immunity of the state case between Germany and Italy. My argument focuses on three key points, which are accountability for crimes, prioritizing human rights, and the need for changes in international law. So firstly, countries that commit serious offences such as war crimes should not be protected by jurisdictional immunity. Immunity allows states to avoid accountability, denying justice to victims. In this case, Germany's action during World War II caused immense suffering, and allowing immunity means the victims' voices are unheard and they're being unresolved. Secondly, the ICJ's decision prioritized legal rules over moral responsibility. While international law protects state immunity, it should not come at the expense of fundamental human rights. Serious crimes against humanity, like those committed here, demand accountability regardless of legal technicalities. Lastly, international law must adapt to modern realities. The ICJ missed an opportunity to set a new precedent, one that says state immunity cannot apply when serious crimes like war are involved. By doing so, the court could have advanced justice and ensured that states are held responsible for their actions.
Thank you, AFRINA, for the first 3 points. My name is Saidatur RAHMAH binti Muhammad SHAHRIL, and my matrix number is 079617. Now, I will continue the presentation while explaining 3 more reasons on why we are disagreeing with the court's judgment in this case. The third point is the evolving norms and power imbalance. We need to consider the imbalance of power in international law, like how a more powerful state gains a lot more advantages compared to smaller states. The ICJ's decision in this case favors powerful countries like Germany while leaving smaller nations like Italy with limited ways to seek justice. But beyond this imbalance, we must also acknowledge the evolving norms in international law. Should state immunity continue to shield countries for accountability for war crimes or human rights violations? We say no. The ICJ in its judgment for this case missed an opportunity to set a new precedent prioritizing victims' right over procedural immunity. Instead of advancing justice, these decisions maintains outdated protections towards smaller states. The next point on why we decided to disagree with the decision of ICJ in this case is because they failed to balance the sovereignty with justice. While state sovereignty is undoubtedly important, it cannot override the need for accountability when violations occur. By upholding immunity, the ICJ has prioritized procedural rule over the substantive right of the victims. This was a missed chance to allow the Italian to give victims recognition and justice for the harm that they have suffered. Balancing sovereignty with justice should have been the focus, but the ICJ has failed to achieve this balance, and this leads to our last point on why we have disagreed with the decision from the ICJ. Because the immunity has encouraged the impunity. By upholding state immunity, it sends a troubling message that states can commit serious crime without facing consequences. This decision risks emboldening powerful nations to violate international law, knowing that they are shielded by this immunity. If the international system, through the International Court, fails to hold states accountable, how can we deter future violations? Justice must not be sacrificed for a mere outdated legal protections. Now, I will pass the floor to the next presenter. Thank you.